Today on Trailblazers, we have Rob Burnet, founder and CEO of Well Told Story, a two-time Emmy Award winning company that uses research and popular media to change the lives of young people in Africa. The company's flagship media platform, Cheetahs, has garnered a following of millions as it tackles the hard questions and issues facing youth in the region today. I'm George Esaias, founder of African Speakers and Artists, and I'd like to welcome you to our Trailblazer interview series. Rob, thank you very much for taking part in our Trailblazer interview series. And thank you for inviting us to your very fancy digs, I must say, here in the Karen suburb of Nairobi, and I think what is sure to be a sweltering hot day. So we're here to really talk about Well Told Story, the company that you founded 6 years ago?
Yep.
Give or take?
7, I think. Yeah.
7?
Yeah.
But before that, let's talk about your journey and what got you to this place. Mm-hmm. And we like to think at African Speakers and Artists that we shine a spotlight on talent and personalities and stories emerging out of the region. And we'd like to think that we're probably the first to have done that, but actually you were doing that about 20 years ago, so you beat us to it. So tell us about your sort of a history in Kenya and what's brought you here.
Yeah, well, a bunch of accidents actually, because I came to East Africa after I left university with my backpack, and I wound up in Kenya by accident mostly, and it was winter time in Europe, and so when somebody offered me a job, I thought, well, I'll try that. I can spend a little time more here before I face whatever life has for me back in the UK. And I called my mum, I remember, in 1993, January, and said I'll be back in 6 weeks. And so 23 years later, here I am, still here. Yeah.
Tell us about Corona.
Well, yeah, because so my first job was working with artists. Mm-hmm. So I worked for an art dealer who was quite famous at the time called Ruth Schaffner, who'd built a sort of well-known art gallery then called Gallery Watatu, and who was very interested in building up contemporary art done by Kenyans. So she hired me as her kind of assistant, and then after a year or so of that, I moved to the museum and I started a studio space for artists. So I was very interested in the making of art. I wasn't very interested in the selling of it, which was the gallery's business. So for the next few years, I based myself at the museum and created this thing called Kuona Trust, which was a studio space, a kind of multi-use studio space for artists. Pretty much anyone who wanted to come and make art could come and use that facility. And it was very popular. And obviously we had lots of visitors who came through the museum, so they saw it. The museum was excited because it was about contemporary culture. And artists were excited because it gave them a place to hang out, learn from one another, and maybe sell a piece of work. And then on the back of that, we started inviting international artists to come and sending Kenyans out. And it grew and grew and grew. So it's grand. It's still today. It's fantastic.
So you must see your legacy every day.
Well, on the walls of my house, yeah, because I got lots of art in those days, and I think it coincided with a boom in cultural activity in Kenya, and so maybe it was early, but it was great, and there was lots of energy going on then. Yeah.
So what happened 7 years ago when you decided to set up Well Told Story and to develop what I think it's safe to say is your flagship media channel, is probably the right way to describe it, Cheetahs. What was the trigger around that?
So so a couple of things happened. So after I'd finished at Kuona, I went and worked for the Ford Foundation, which is a big American philanthropy, and we did some work on building media and trying to, again, encourage local voices to occupy the media space. And we got involved in some really popular and successful media stuff on television and radio. And
funded by Ford.
Funded by Ford. And so, but somewhere in there was a sense that, all of this energy that was there in the arts wasn't focused well on creating positive change. So I got sort of interested in the idea that could we harness the power of local voices and emerging local media to leverage social change. So for a while I went and made a couple of television series. I worked with a TV company, and we had a bit of success there too, but there was a sense then that television is great if you have a television, but it's not all that good if you don't have a TV. So if we really wanted to build big audiences and leverage big social change, we probably needed to find other media to do so. So there was something along those lines. We were thinking about how would we create a really massive conversation And at the same time, in 2007, beginning of 2008, the elections went wrong, and there was what's now called post-election violence, and it was a bad time for Kenya, and there was a scary moment when hundreds of thousands of young people, of Kenyan youth, were sort of pulled apart by politicians and dragged into conflict. And these were the same people who it seemed like media had a role to reach. And so the birth of Well Told Story, this organization, and the birth of Cheetahs was kind of linked to all of that. How do we engage millions of young people from East Africa who don't have enough to do, who are trying to figure out what life holds for them? How do they make the future better? And how can we as storytellers or media makers assist that process? So Cheetahs was evolved as our response to that. How do we create a massive conversation with 15 to 24-year-olds that can be about good stuff? And how do we use entertainment and storytelling to create engagement, but not engagement about, what we call bubblegum media, no nutrition. How do we create engagement about really big, important ideas without being boring?
And you mentioned the word entertainment. I'll refer to my notes here so I don't misquote. But there's an article in the New Republic which describes Cheetahs as a media project that uses, and I quote, entertainment to get people to eat their figurative vegetables. Does that kind of sum it up for you?
I've never heard that quote.
Have you not?
Yeah, I think that's about right, isn't it? In that vegetables are good for you, right?
Yes, exactly.
You might not choose to eat them. We want young people to access the best things, the best ideas, and to harness those ideas and things to make their lives better. And it's not always obvious how you do that, especially when the subjects are difficult, maybe boring, off-putting and complicated. So in that respect, what we're doing is finding innovative media ways to package complexity so that it can be relevant and exciting to the people who have most to gain.
Yeah, so do you kind of untangle complexity at the same time?
Right, so we think a lot about that. We think a lot about how ideas... We think a lot about how the blockages that inhibit people from making good decisions. And very often that's about understanding where people really are in relation to difficult choices they make. And trying to see the world through the eyes of the people we're trying to serve, and try and unpick social problems from their perspective. And then when you know that, when you've done that, when you can see how the world is arranged from their point of view, then you can write a story about it, and then you can create a kind of an exciting media experience that gets people to reflect on their own dialogue, their own journey, their own thoughts.
These are universal themes. I mean, these aren't Africa-centric or Kenya-specific. These will apply to a games developer or a Hollywood studio or anyone really. Do you find that? Do you find that you're getting brands around the world that are interested in what you're doing?
So the key to our work, the key to engaging millions of people is authenticity. If we can create a world and a story which feels absolutely relevant and real, and then we can spin that with drama and excitement, we get massive engagement. Yeah. And I think that's a universal truth. So we work with some of the world's biggest brands because they understand that they can ride with us into an authentic experience that our audience can feel and internalize. And that's the most powerful form of brand development, I think.
For people that are unfamiliar with Cheetahs, what does the Cheetahs World look like?
So it's a story which we deliver on multiple platforms. So it's a single story which it's sort of harnessed around a DJ, and he's Boy to his family, but he's DJ B to the world. In Tanzania, he's known as DJ T. And he's a 19-year-old school leaver who didn't get a job, didn't get into college. He's idle at home. He's actually like millions and millions of young people in East Africa, wondering what to do with their lives. His mates have all joined a gang, and they're up to mischief. But he refuses to join because he has a secret. And his secret is he's built an FM radio station in his bedroom. And so somehow, we don't exactly get how he's done this, but he's able to hack into the frequencies of radio stations with his show, which is a call out to young people to step up. Don't wait. Good stuff is not coming. You need to make it. So if you've got something in your life which is working, or you've seen something which seems to be a good idea, send me a message, text me, write to me on Facebook, and I'm going to share that with everybody. So together, we, the young people of East Africa, will step up. So the other main characters in the story are listeners to his show who once in a while come across something. I've got to tell the DJ. He can tell everyone. And so, they're boys and girls, older and younger, kids, teens. There's the girl from the slum, the kid from the valley, the Rift Valley, the coast, upcountry. So they represent all the different types of young people out there, and each of them has a mum and a dad, a kid brother. There's evil, there's love, there's romance. So we deliver this story in a comic book, which is massive. I think in Kenya since 2010, we've distributed 52 million copies.
Wow.
So huge edition. In Tanzania, our print run in Tanzania is 10 times bigger than the biggest circulating newspaper in Tanzania. So absolutely enormous distribution of comic books. But of course, the DJ also has a radio show. So that show syndicates on lots and lots and lots of FM stations across East Africa, so presented by the DJ himself. And of course, because he's online, of course he would be, his Facebook page is massive. And a lot of people don't have access to the internet, so they like to send SMSs. So I think in Kenya last year, DJB received 1.9 million text messages. So it's
incredible.
It's a huge engagement. And then there's been a film we made. We shot it on a Nokia mobile phone last year. It's been on YouTube. We distributed it 10,000 DVDs before Christmas through our distribution network in Kenya.
So, but let's touch on that, sorry, because you make it sound like it's an everyday occurrence. So you shot a film,
yes,
just using a mobile phone,
right?
Well, a feature-length film.
Because that's how DJB would make a film, right? I mean, who has access to a camera? Right? Of course, you have to use your phone for that. Yeah. So we start. Actually, what happened was we started by making a television series, and we wanted it to be like a magazine show, and lots of people submitted their content on WhatsApp. So we asked the audience, send in your stuff, send it to the DJ. He's on TV now. So we packaged lots of stuff that came from the audience, and then we thought, well, let's anchor that with a drama. So a drama was made, shot in the slums of Kisumu and here in Nairobi in Mathare, one of the toughest areas of the city. And it was all done on location, made by lots of young people. Many of them were like first time ever in front of a camera. I think we had one famous guy who came, because he's a friend of ours, to act in it, who played God Papa, who's like the ultimate villain. He's actually the embodiment of evil, I would say. We made 13 episodes, I think, and we aired them, and it was big. And then it was like, well, what a shame it's over. Shouldn't we, what a pity we can't use them again. And then we thought, hang on, we've got 13 of them. If we just sort of smush them together, would that be a film? So we called the editors and said, can we just smush them together? And they went, well, it's not that easy. And we went, oh, come on. So a month later, we had a feature-length movie. And it's great. Jongo Love, it's called. It had 110,000 views on YouTube over Christmas, which, considering where we are and the commitment it takes to watch an hour and 30-minute long movie on YouTube, we're pretty pleased with that. But it's a great film, and it has subtitles, so I encourage you to watch it.
I've already seen snippets.
Jongo Love, yeah, terrific. That's consistent with the world of DJB, because what are the barriers to making a movie? Well, apparently it's kit and, equipment and edit suite. Well, we edited it on a laptop. We shot it on a telephone. I mean, we kind of tried to break all those barriers, and I think that's what we've done ever since we started Cheetahs. And partly that's perhaps because we're not really media makers. We are sort of accidental media makers. We're storytellers, really. And we've figured out what we make as we've done it. Mm-hmm. And so we didn't really know there were rules, and we kept breaking them. And we kept doing things that apparently weren't done before. And I think that's really how Cheetahs ended up looking. We've done some festivals on university campuses. We're now doing networking clubs. That's going to be really interesting. We've got this group of guys, fans themselves, who've organized a thing they're calling Cheetahs Connect, which is a whole network of events over weekends that people are organizing. We continue to make the comic, massive volumes. We obviously make the radio show. We're looking at, We're constantly innovating and trying to figure out new ways to enrich the relationship between our audience and the story. And I think what's also happened then is that somehow the space that we've created is a new kind of media space. So yeah, sure, we author part of it, but increasingly it's the audience that authors the media with us. So half or more of everything that we push out is made by the audience. It's just submitted to the DJ and repackaged and presented to the audience again. So increasingly the notion of Cheetahs as a media platform is like a collectively owned space. I mean, maybe we curate it, but we certainly don't create it. And that's quite powerful because we invite our audience to come and co-create it with us. And that endlessly builds excitement and engagement.
And drives the authenticity.
And drives the authenticity. And the authenticity is really critical here, I think, because the power of Cheetahs to engage people is because the authors of Cheetahs are the characters that star in the media and the audience who then interact with them. So although very often we're dealing with big and complicated ideas, we're presenting them to the audience for discussion in a completely non-judgmental way. So we are basically just surfacing everyday questions and saying, how do we think about this? Should we be worried about that? Is that a kind of thing we should be attempting to fix? Is that a problem that maybe needs to be explored? And what we find is people are really excited to have those conversations. And if no one's asking questions about difficult stuff, then they don't get answered. Whereas if we surface these dilemmas for everybody to consume, suddenly we have millions of people paying attention. And somewhere in there is this, I think, important idea that the way norms form is through collective discussion. So you come with your friends around the table, and when somebody you know and respect tells you that they're a vegetarian, and you think, I had no idea. And then you hear that person describe why it is that they've decided to be a vegetarian, for example. And then someone else around the table goes, well, I'm a vegetarian too. Really? And before the end of the conversation, suddenly you've reconsidered your own position on vegetarianism. And so a new norm gets surfaced through a discussion, and we all reflect on how we think about that norm. And actually, if it makes more sense to become a vegetarian because of what you've heard from people you respect, you end up asking whether you should change your view and ultimately your behavior about that. So what we're seeing now is, and we spend a lot of time and effort on the research and the analytics side of what we make, is to say, actually, that's what's happening. We're surfacing difficult questions. We're asking really, what is the norm that we share on this? And we're seeing the norms move. And because we have 4 million, 4.2 million people somewhere in Kenya at least, and huge numbers of people who are following the story quite actively, when you surface an idea like that, it's not happening around a table with you and your friends. It's happening with 4 million people at a time. So then you are looking at basically social transformation. But the important point here is that we don't control that. We can't dictate. All we can do is surface. And actually, it's the community of our audience who decide how they wish to respond to the questions that are being raised. We can't, and that's a really important point. We have no power to determine what the outcomes will be. But what we can do is, if we consistently promote important, valuable ideas, people reach their own conclusions. But invariably, they reach the right conclusion.
So you have over 4 million regular followers, audience of what you do, which must be about 60% of that segment, of that age segment across the country?
It's about 50%.
50%.
50% actively follow the media that we make. 50% of all the 15 to 24s.
And what other sort of behavioural changes have you observed within that set versus, the non-followers?
So we've recently been part of a big study done by a university in the US, who were following a very large community of young women in urban communities in 5 Kenyan cities over 4 years. And they were tracking these young women year by year by year by year, with the same women every year, asking them the same questions and trying to figure out what was influencing them and what kind of behaviors were they adjusting as time went by. And so after 4 years, you're able then to do quite interesting analysis and say, well, we can see what changed over the period. And because you've got lots and lots of data over quite a long period, you can start to analyze what was it that caused this particular change? What was it that caused this particular change? So they've been able to isolate the contribution that following Cheetahs has made to the choices that these people in the study made. So a couple of really surprising results for us. So young women in the Cheetahs audience don't have unplanned babies anything like as often as young women outside the Cheetahs audience. So that's great, and we've worked on that. Actually, we've asked people to reflect on that. If you have a plan, if you make a plan, you make good decisions, then probably you don't have a baby by mistake. That would be a mistake. You know, you want to have a baby when you choose to. So let's talk about that a bit. That's one of the things we've worked on. But another thing that we saw in the research is that young women who follow the storyline haven't been getting married as early. It's like, wow. I mean, like in a big way, significantly.
Remarkable.
You're something like 2.7 times less likely to be married age 19 if you're a Cheetahs audience member than if you're a non-Cheetahs audience member. And it's kind of attributable to the Cheetahs exposure. So the professors in the US have been telling us. So you think, well, now what's interesting is we haven't asked people not to get married. That's not a story that we've raised. But so then we've looked again in the data. It turns out they stay in school longer too. So it turns out that being in the storyline with us leads people to make a whole set of good decisions. And they're not decisions that we necessarily pointed at and said, try that. No, it's not. It's just young people start to feel better about themselves. They make fewer bad decisions. They don't have babies so unexpectedly. Therefore, they have more time to be in school. And then it turns out they have a little side hustle. They're making a little bit of money over here. They have more money in their pocket. And then, you know, all these good things start to accrue, some of which were our intended consequences, but many of which were just good decisions that smart people make when you offer them the possibility.
That's frankly incredible what's happening. And it surely must make you the darling of governments and NGOs, and they must be banging on your door trying to get involved in what you're doing.
Well, I wish they were, but it's...
Do they know about it yet?
It's new news, actually.
Okay, well, there we go.
Yeah.
Not anymore.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I mean, I think that it's something we're only just seeing. So this is very recent research. We're just processing it now over the last few weeks. But we're obviously extremely excited about it.
Well, watch this space, I think.
Yeah, I think we'll see what happens.
Absolutely.
But I think ultimately what it boils down to is empowerment.
Yeah.
That, you know, when we started 6 years ago in Kenya, I used to say that we were the first people to draw the slums. We were making a story set in the slum. One part of our story is set in the slums. And you think, well, at the time, that felt really, really new. That world, the actual everyday genuine life of young people living in poverty or ordinary conditions in modern Kenya, that story wasn't being told in the media. It's not on television. It's not in literature. You can't find it. It's not being told. You turn on the TV, you see a story from somewhere else in the world. Now, it's changed a bit over the years, but it's still the case that actually holding up a mirror and saying, here's ordinary life playing out in the media. That's an exciting experience for people. People like the validation they get from having their story told back to them. And I think that was something we set out to do. But I think we didn't realize how important that was and how powerful that can be. And that's, again, it comes back to that idea of authenticity. We could mess it up tomorrow by making the story crazy. You know, there's no superheroes in our world. The world of Cheetahs is the real world of growing up in Kenya.
Yeah. But I mean, at the end of the day, you are a for-profit business. So what's the commercial model around a well-told story and around Cheetahs?
So you're right, we're a business, we're not an NGO. Now, we behave sometimes a lot like an NGO, but we are very proud of the distinction. So we define ourselves these days as a shared value business. So we say that our first priority as a business, sincerely our first priority, is to create value for our audience. So we aim to create social and economic value for our audience. We have another way of describing that. We say it's about more sex and more money.
I prefer that way.
We want our audience to have more sex and more money. And we figure if we can create that for them, we'll have an ever-growing audience of people who want to be part of what we do. So that's our first priority. Our second priority is to create value for our clients. And our clients could be Safaricom, Vodafone, could be Coca-Cola, could be Unilever, but it could also be the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, or DFID, the UK government, or the World Bank, or the Ministry of Health here in Kenya. So, but we don't distinguish between them. We say, well, we're about creating value. So the kind of value that Unilever would like is about their brand, their brands, and the kind of value that the Gates Foundation would like is about measurable social change. And we're comfortable with both of those, provided what they want creates social and economic value for our audience. And there's a tension there, because some brands come to us and they clearly want to exploit our audience. Well, we're not going to do that, because our first priority is creating social and economic value. But we figure then, if we've done our job right, we've created 2 points of value, then we can create value too, because we're providing a service, and that service has a cost attached to it. And that's where we can take our value. But we try and do that in a win-win-win manner, with no exploitation. And that's our business model.
So Rob, I'd like to come back to this kind of issue of complexity, because it's such a crucial theme for corporates around the world. Just tell us a little bit more about how you handle complexity and how you deal with it across Well Told Story and across Cheetahs.
So we think it's really important to think about complexity, and there's a couple of illustrations we use for that. So the world is divided into kind of complicated problems and complex problems. So an example of a complicated problem would be launching a satellite into space. You know, thousands of moving parts, millions of dollars, incredibly complicated. But there's a manual which says, you know, do these things in the same order each time, and every time you do it, you will get a satellite consistently into space. So that's a complicated problem. But what about raising a child or nurturing an adolescent? You know, you can do the same things over and over, and you'll get a different result every time. And that's a complex problem. It's a complex challenge as opposed to a complicated challenge. And the trouble is that when you're dealing with people, you're dealing with complex problems, complex challenges, beyond complicated. And I think in the case of raising a child or nurturing an adolescent, which is what we focus on, the problem is that we don't control all the parts. We don't control all the inputs. On the satellite, we do. But with a kid, we don't. We don't have access to all of the things they have access to. We only have a very, very limited, even as parents, we only have a very limited amount of influence over our own children. So we have a little bit of bandwidth when we have the attention of the people we're trying to influence. Just a little moment where we might be lucky enough to have their attention for a few moments. So the takeaway is, don't waste that opportunity. Make sure that when you have the chance to engage somebody, you are planned and prepared and strategic, so that when you have their attention, if you are able to secure their attention, you're in there with a voice and a persuasive reason which touches people in the way that will most likely affect their consciousness. So in our world, we do that by telling a story, an engaging, captivating story, which hopefully holds their attention. We make our media available on a giant scale, so it's easy to find it, and then when you've found it, you feel it, because the story is profound. And that brings us to the notion of authenticity, that if you don't have an authentic voice to speak with, when you have that moment of attention, you lose the opportunity. Your influence will be wasted. And I think that's a key insight for us, the notion that we have very few chances to communicate. So we have to plan what and how we communicate with great skill and care. That's a key insight.
And you've referenced the huge amount of analysis and measurement that you undertake. What have you learnt from all of that effort?
So there's another very interesting sort of idea that we work with a lot. So often enough, a challenge will be presented to us, which basically says young people in East Africa are not making a clever choice. There's something they're not doing. So an example of that would be, there's a new constitution here in Kenya, and they've changed the way government works, and they've started making decisions at much more local levels. But the problem is that young people aren't engaging with those local decision-making mechanisms in the way that was planned when the new constitution was rolled out 3 years ago. So we're trying to address that problem by communicating to our audience. But the starting point for the challenges is a scale of 0 to 100. So at the moment, our audience are not really engaging with government. And we would like to move them in the direction of 100% engagement. So that's the sort of starting point of the problem. The people we're trying to work with aren't doing the thing we'd like them to do. So we accept that, and then we go and talk to our audience. We go and do really, really extensive, we call it ground truth research. And we go and ask them to explain how they see the world, and we do that in kind of playful, unusual ways. And we discover that the problem doesn't look like this, starting at 0, heading towards 100%. It turns out there's another scale. And this scale starts at 0 and goes to 100% rejection. So it turns out that young people aren't here poised, ready to start going to attend government meetings. They are here saying, no way. I have made up my mind. I am 100% opposed to doing the thing that that people want me to do. So the task we have then isn't to switch people on to start making wise decisions and doing clever things. The task we have is to overcome their resistance to doing it. And lots of things fit into this category. So I get it that I shouldn't have a baby before I'm ready. I shouldn't have an unplanned baby. That would probably be a bad thing. But using contraception, which is the remedy to that, the most reasonable remedy, I'm not ready to do that. So I get the point, what contraception does, but I'm not here. I'm here. I've made a decision not to use contraception because I've got evidence, I've got information that maybe other people don't see, which has led me to draw my own conclusions. So most of our work is actually in this space, is in the rejection space. Most of our work is actually in analyzing why people aren't making smart decisions and trying to figure out how would we flip that rather than how do we switch people on to making smart decisions. It's almost always about dealing with rejection rather than dealing with persuasion. And I think that's a universal insight that we've found to be extremely powerful.
It's been an amazing journey for you for the last 6 or 7 years. I mean, do you ever find yourself looking ahead to the next 10? I mean, where do you see Cheetahs? Do you see it in every African country? Do you see it in Bangladesh? What does the future hold?
So we're now in 2 countries in East Africa. There's about, I think, close to 20 million young people in our target audience in those 2 countries who are our first priority for the time being. How do we serve those 20 million? How many of them can we reach? Currently, it's growing fast. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, well, there's something here. There's something magic that we seem to have stumbled across with Cheetahs, and it's powerful and it's exciting, and we would like it to serve as many people as it can. But we also know that printing paper and manufacturing comic books is a cumbersome and expensive business, and we also know that the internet is coming fast. So actually the place we're most excited about perhaps at the moment is to say, how do we now create an online experience that can mimic the pretty analog experiences that we've got? So as our audience converts to online, we're also there for them with an exciting offer. So we've got a team working on that at the moment, and we're coming up with some really exciting ideas and experiments. So I think that's probably where we'll be in 10 years' time, somewhere in a kind of ever-evolving hybrid space, somewhere between for-profit and non-profit, somewhere between analog and digital, and hopefully spilling over the borders of East Africa into the 4 corners of the world.
Speaking of hybrid, will Sheng still be the language? Well, tell us what it is, first of all.
So we work in Kenya. We work in Sheng. Mm-hmm. So that's the sort of street slang of our audience. In Tanzania, it doesn't happen that way. In Tanzania, there's a different language that we use, which is perhaps less clearly defined than Sheng. But again, it's about the audience who defines that. So I think everywhere we go, the chances are we'll be figuring out what's the authentic language that people want to engage with, to have those big conversations.
Well, Rob, I can listen to you all day. It's a really fascinating story, and I wish you all the very best with it. And thank you once again for allowing us into your office to shoot our Trailblazer series.
Thank you very much.